Okay, so we are going to start the session now. So good morning and welcome everyone in and out of Thailand to our event by PSU Open Mobility 2022. And we are glad to have you all here on board again and gather up, sharing knowledge as an intellectual community. And today our invited speaker will cover the topic of identity and global storytelling for a multilingual future. And before we move on, allow me to briefly introduce our today's moderator, Assistant Professor Dr. Badin Welate. Dr. Welate is currently an acting vice president for student development and alumni affairs and an English instructor at Prince of Sukla University, Pattani campus. His research interests include teachers' education, intercultural communication, intercultural awareness, language belief, attitudes, and identity. Now, to cut the chase, I'm going to let Dr. Welate continue with the session. Dr. Welate, please continue the session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf. I think let me share screen. I think this is the event that we are going to join together tonight, this morning in Thailand, but yeah, from some other corners of the world, maybe you are probably in the evening or probably you are in early morning, or yeah, it depends on your time zone, right? So I think before we start our session, it would be great if you can make your Zoom name by typing your name and then your affiliation, so then we can know where you are from. I mean, so then we can know that which part of the world that you are right now. So it'd be great. So for example, I said Bodin and in the bracket PSU Pattani. So just a few seconds before we start our session today, I think that I would say PSU Pattani is honored and pleased and to host the session today, and with a great speakers joining with us, will be sharing her knowledge about her expertise, right? So I think that this is an international virtual seminar which is under a project called PSU Open Mobility 2022, and then under the theme of from the clouds to the cloud, inspiring and moving beyond frontiers. So I think the today's topic is quite interesting for those who are joining our session today, and it will be about identity and global storytelling for a multilingual future. And we have a great honors that we have Professor Dr. Bonny Norton coming to be our guest speakers tonight. Tonight probably in somewhere of the world, but in Thailand this morning. So let me introduce our guest speakers. Professor Dr. Bonny Norton. This is I got the information from Wikipedia. She was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. During apartheid years, and she is a university, Killam professor and a distinguished university scholar at the Department of Language and Literacy Education, UBC, at Vancouver, Canada, right? So, and then her primary research interests are identity and language learning, critical literacy, and international development. So, she did a lot of, research work. And I think today she is pleased to, reveal some of her research. And Professor Norton has published a number of books and research works on language teachers' identity. And now she is a fellow of Royal Society of Canada and the American Educational Research Association, and was elected, BC Academic of the Year in 2020. So from her, background that I mentioned earlier, you can see that she has a lot of, knowledge, and she is happy to share with us today. And I do believe that all our guest speakers are ready to listen from her. Under the topic, as I mentioned earlier, it is about, identity and global storytelling for a multilingual future. So please, I give the floor to Professor Dr. Bonny Norton.
Yes. Well, good morning to everybody in Thailand. It's now evening in Vancouver. You can probably see behind me, my window faces the garden, and it's getting a little bit darker. So you'll see over time, it's probably going to be pitch dark by the end of this particular talk. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to share my thoughts with you. I think it's wonderful that we draw on technology, to connect with one another across the planet. That I'm sitting in Vancouver and you're sitting in Thailand, and many of you are in, of course, other parts of the world. It's such a privilege that we have this technology that crosses time and space. So, as Dr. Welate said, I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia, and I'm speaking to you from the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam people. I'm a settler on this land. As Dr. Welate said, I'm from South Africa, but I've lived in Canada for many years, and I feel very privileged to live and work on this territory. I'm going to actually share my screen with you because I'm going to take you through a PowerPoint during my talk, and then I hope to also do a little demonstration of a digital storybook platform that I hope will be valuable for you in Thailand and also in other parts of the world. So I'm going to, I'll just share my screen, and I'll pull that up over there, and I'll go to my PowerPoint over here, and let me just open this up. And let's see over here. Let's see that I'm going to just actually go full screen, I hope. There you go. Hopefully you can all see that, everybody. And so the title is Identity and Global Storybooks for a Multilingual Future. I do have a lot of my material that's available on my website. So all you have to do is Google Bonny Norton with a Y, and you'll get to my major website, and there are many materials there, papers, talks, videos that you can access. So if we can't deal with all the questions today, you'll be able to go to my website and check those out. The image that I have on this front page is an image of a computer on the one hand, but it's also an image at the bottom of a clay keyboard that was built in northwestern Uganda. And I use that image to show you that everywhere in the world, there is a great desire to enter into the digital world. So even if people don't have electricity and running water and computers, they will use their local resources, their clay, to build a keyboard so that when computers come to their community, they can hit the ground running. So it just demonstrates, of course, that we do live in a very unequal world where some people have technology at their fingertips and others have a great deal more difficulty accessing this global community. I'm going to talk to you initially about my foundational work on identity, investment, and imagined communities, and my more recent work on a model of investment, which I've developed with my former graduate student, Ron Darwin. And then I'm going to look towards the future in terms of linking, issues of identity and investment with the Global Storybooks Project. And then I hope to do a demonstration of Storybooks Canada and Storybooks for Learners of English. So I look forward to having this time together. We will, roughly speaking, I will probably speak for about 50 minutes, Then I will do a demonstration, and then we will open it up for questions. And I want to thank Yusuf Bunsap, Dr. Yusuf, for connecting me to you, and for doing a lot of the initial introductions and connections. So what I'm interested in is the relationship between the language learner and the social world. How do we theorize this very complex relationship? Under what conditions does social interaction take place? And to what extent do social relations of power, such as racism or sexism or elitism or homophobia, limit the opportunities for language learners to speak? These are the questions that have driven my research over many years. I began my research, in fact, with an article in the TESOL Quarterly in 1995 called Identity Investment and Imagine Communities, and then did a special issue of the TESOL Quarterly in 1997, and then brought out a book in 2000 on identity, and then worked with the construct of Imagine Communities special issue in 2003 of the Journal of Language, Identity and Education. And then in 2013 brought out a second edition of my book, Identity and Language Learning. And interesting, you see it, there is in fact a mobile phone, on that book cover to represent the changing world. And then more recently, as I said, worked with my student Ron Darwin on a model of investment, which we first developed in 2015 and have published in an open access article in 2023. So a lot of this material is on my website, and the 2023 article with Ron Darwin is freely available. It's motivation, it's identity and investment and motivation. What's the difference? And you can Google it, and it is freely available to the international community. So if we look at language, power, and identity, look at some of the earlier work. And one of the participants in my study was from, at that time, called the Czechoslovakia. And she said, I feel uncomfortable using English in the group of people whose English language is their mother tongue, because they speak fluently without any problems, and I feel inferior. So what you see here is a woman who was in fact multilingual, who could speak many languages fluently, but because she couldn't speak English fluently, and she was living in Canada, she felt inferior to other native speakers. And the way I theorize this is that we have to look at language not only as a linguistic system, but also as a social practice. Because as Whedon says, language is the place where our sense of ourselves, our subjectivity, is constructed. So through language, we also construct our identity and our sense of self. So when I talk about language as a social practice, what does this actually mean in the educational context? Well, in this little vignette written by Doris Abiria in 2011, Doris had come to Vancouver with her husband, Sam and Dema, and their two young children. And Sam was doing his PhD, and Doris was doing her master's degree. And she had these two little boys who spent a year in Vancouver. After a year, they returned to Uganda, and they found that life was actually not that simple. And Doris wrote to Margaret Early and myself and spoke a little bit about the complexity of the challenges for the boys. She says the boys are getting better. In school, the teachers complain that they have gone with the style they are calling Western. The teachers say the boys have an accent that they do not hear, while the boys say the teachers speak English upside down. Paul talks to the teacher in class anytime he wishes, when children are expected first to listen to the teacher and talk when the teacher asks them. Now we keep checking on them frequently in school and supporting them more at home. We hope that by next year, they will be okay. So what you see here is that when Paul and his younger brother were in school in Canada, there were certain practices that were considered highly acceptable in the class, to ask questions, to engage actively, in the classroom activities. But when they went to Uganda, the children were expected to be, to only speak when the teacher invites them to speak. So there was a very different relationship in the classroom. And of course, the teacher spoke Ugandan English as opposed to Canadian English. So the boys kind of realized that life was actually, much more complicated than they had thought when they returned to Uganda. And that's because language is not only a linguistic system of grammar and vocabulary, but it's also a social practice in which relationships become negotiated. So I define identity as how a person understands his or her relationship to the world, how that relationship is structured across time and space, and how the person understands possibilities for the future. So this for me is very important. So we understand relationships across time and space, but we also are concerned about possibilities for the future. What are people's hopes for the future? What are their imagined identities? So what I'm interested in is that when we teach a language, it's not only that we are focusing on rules of use, as Del Hymes would say. How do we use the language? I'm also interested in the right to speak, and also what Bourdieu calls the power to impose reception. By that I mean, or by that Bourdieu means, when you speak, are other people going to listen? Can you impose reception on behalf of your interlocutors? So when we think of communicative competence, it's not only can you speak, it's also who is listening to you. Will other people respect you as a speaker? I also developed a construct called investment, which is a complement to the construct of motivation. Because motivation is a psychological construct which sees the individual as having a unitary and coherent identity. And the idea is that motivation is a character trait of a learner. You are either motivated or you're not motivated. Whereas investment is a sociological construct. It references a complex identity of a speaker, which changes across time and space, and is also reproduced in social interaction. You are constantly shifting and changing your investments depending on your relationships with others. And what is also important is power. Who has power in any given community? Who can speak? Who is listened to? What are their relationships? I say if learners invest in a second language, they will acquire a wider range of symbolic and material resources, which will increase their cultural capital and social power. And by symbolic resources, I refer to language education and friendship. They are more intangible resources, and material resources are capital, real estate, and money. So if we look at another participant in my early research called Mai, who was actually from Vietnam, which is not very far away from you in Thailand. And Mai came to Vancouver and she said, I was hoping the course would help me the same as we learned in another course. But some night we only spent time on one man He came from Europe. He talked about his country, what's happening and what was happening. And all the time, we didn't learn at all. And tomorrow, the Indian man speaks something for them. Maybe all week, I didn't write anymore in my book. And what's very interesting about that data here is that Mai was a highly motivated learner. We know that Mai went to school in Ontario, in Toronto, and worked very hard and came at nighttime by herself and was highly motivated. But she was not invested in the language practices of this classroom. And in fact, she actually withdrew from this particular class. So why did someone who is highly motivated drop out of class? And what I've argued is that she is not invested in the language practices of that classroom. Why not? What I've argued is that, in fact, the teacher, perhaps with the best of intentions, essentialized identity. She saw ethnicity as the only salient feature of identity. In other words, are you from Europe? Are you from India? Are you from Peru? Are you from Italy? Are you from Thailand? But that's only one part of your identity. There are many other parts of your identity. It also focuses on the past. Tell me about your life in India. But what about your present, which is very important to people? What about your future and the future of your children? Also, there was a neglect of literacy as central to learning. Excuse me. The focus of the class was on talking, sharing, which was obviously very important, but writing is also important. And this was not something the teacher focused on. So the question is, was Mai unmotivated? Or was Mai perhaps not invested in language learning? What do we mean by this? Mai was someone who worked in a factory, and she was telling her friend, Carl, about her experience of working in the factory. She said, after work today, when I was walking by myself on New Street, I met Carl, who was going to the same school with me last course. I just told him about my job and the course I'm taking. He said to me, the good thing for you is to go to school. Then in the future, you would have a job to work in the office. I hope so. But sometime I'm scared to dream about that. So what you find here is that Mai worked in a factory. She wore the same factory clothes to work every day. But in the corner of the factory was an office where people could wear the clothes they wished to wear. They could wear high-heeled shoes. They had a very different relationship to the workplace. And for Mai, that was her imagined identity. She wanted to work in the office. So when she goes to a classroom and they're talking about life in India, they're talking about life in Europe, they're not doing any literacy activities, they're not dealing with the present and the future, Mai is not invested in the language practices of the classroom, and she withdraws her participation. So imagined communities refer to groups of people not immediately tangible and accessible, with whom we connect through the power of the imagination. So Mai was someone who had an imagined community. She wanted to be part of the community of office workers. She wanted to take off her factory clothes and join a new community. So an imagined community assumes an imagined identity, and investment in the target language must be understood within this context. So what I've argued is we need to ask different questions. We can ask, are students motivated to learn a language? Are teachers motivated to teach a language? But we also need to ask, are students and teachers invested in the language and literacy practices of a given classroom and community. And we always need to make connections between student identity and teacher identity. Look at, for example, what one of the students in one of my graduate classes, this was a while back, I wrote about this in 2017. She said, Bonnie, I'd never heard of the construct of investment, but I've tried it out on my students. Because what I've found with my adult learners is many of them drop out of class. And before she learned about investment, she said she had 25 students in class and only 9 remained at the end of class. After learning about investment, she said she had in the next class 29 students and 25 remained at the end of class. And I asked her, what did she do that was different in the classroom? And she said, I began by imagining what a good English teacher would look like for my students. I altered my practice to reflect what I imagined their idea of a good school would look like. So she adjusted her practices to ensure that students had investment in the language practices of her classroom. Now, that was some of my earlier work. Now, more recently, in 2015, of course, we have a very different economic world order. We have different theories and language ideologies. We talk about linguistic capital. We talk about symbolic competence. And at that time, what we see is that technology becomes increasingly more important. So when I wrote my first paper in 1995, technology was just on the horizon. But 20 years later, technology is an absolutely integral part of our life. And we are a very mobile community now, a very mobile global community where we can physically move across time and space, but we can also virtually connect, just as we are now. We can connect across time and space. So I worked with my former student, Ron Darwin, who's now at UBC as a full-time assistant professor, on identity and a model of investment in applied linguistics. And that was published in the annual review of applied linguistics in 2015. And Ron is actually from the Philippines, which is not very far away from where you are in Southeast Asia. What we argued is that we are living in a new social world. There are new forms of social interaction and new ways of conceptualizing speech. In particular, how do we claim the right to speak in the digital era? If we have a look, for example, at Henrietta, I've done a lot of work in the African context. I'm from South Africa. In this particular case, I was working in Uganda. And Henrietta was one of the pseudonyms, it's a pseudonym, who was working on our project. And she did a lot of domestic work in her community, fetched water, did cleaning. But when you put a computer in her hand, when you put a digital camera in her hand, you change her relationship to her community. She shifts her power relationship within that community. And she can go into a police inspector's office and take pictures of him because she is someone who has power or knows people who have power. And here we see these young women in an internet cafe in southwestern Uganda who go into that cafe and say, today is our day. This is true not only for students, but also for teachers, as we see with Sam and Dema's work. I feel very powerful like a man, says Betty, a Ugandan school teacher, because I had never held a camera in my life. I've always seen only men carrying cameras and taking photos in big public functions, like maybe Independence Celebration, political rallies and wedding ceremonies. But now as I move in the community taking pictures with my camera, I feel I'm also very powerful. Like a man, I'm now a learned person. So even though Betty, in fact, was a very learned person way before she picked up that camera, she does see that connection to technology gives her power that she otherwise would not have had. And that so much of that power is often held by the men in her community. So the digital connection means a great deal for women in her society, and in particular in the schools. Look at, for example, Theo, who was a young student, probably around 14, 15 years old, a Ugandan teenager who said, I want to spread technology about over the village, and then if time goes on, even the world in general. Because there are many of people in our villages that don't know about using the computer, and they cannot read. But if I train them how to use the computer, you never know they can use it. So look at the kind of imagined identity that Theo has. You know, he sees the power of technology, and he sees that he himself can help others reach a wider world. He said, you know, I can train them how to use the computer. So he has the imagined identity of a trainer that will give people access to the digital world. So Ron Darwin and I developed a new model of investment that addressed the ways in which people can claim the right to speak, given the way power operates materially and symbolically in the digital era. So we already have that relationship between identity and investment. But we use that model to develop more fully the relationship to capital, which I will discuss more fully, as well as ideology. What is the relationship between identity, capital, ideology, and investment? So we have that relationship of identity and investment. And as I've said, if we look at Mai, who was a highly motivated learner, but not invested in the language practices of her classroom. And this, of course, had an impact on her identity and her hopes for the future. But if we look at issues of capital, what do we mean by capital? Bourdieu talks about three very important forms of capital. We are all familiar with economic capital, which is your wealth, your property, your income. But what about cultural capital, which is the knowledge that you bring to a particular situation, your educational credentials, the cultural forms that you are familiar with? All this is part of your cultural capital. Your knowledge of how to use a computer, how to use a digital camera, all this is cultural capital. And also there is social capital. Are you connected to networks of power? So when Henrietta picks up a computer or a digital camera, she knows people who have power, who have money, who have resources, and she's connected to those people. So she is connected and she has social capital because she's connected to networks of power. Now, symbolic capital is the form that different types of capital take once they are perceived and recognized as legitimate. So in many ways, is the capital that you have recognized in your community? Is the knowledge, for example, of using a computer or using a camera, do other people recognize this as legitimate knowledge? And this takes us into the area of ideology. Dominant ways of thinking that organize and stabilize societies while simultaneously determining modes of inclusion and exclusion. What are the dominant ways of thinking in a given society? What are the opportunities for women and for men, for older people and younger people, for rural people and urban people? Who is included, who is excluded from the regimes of power in a given community? So what we have here is a model of investment that looks at identity, capital, and ideology. And the notion of positioning is important for issues of identity. The systemic patterns of control that I will talk about next connects you with issues of ideology and capital. And the affordances and benefits of investment are also central to this model more broadly. What questions do we ask? How is the learner positioned by others? And how does the learner position her interlocutors? How do these positions shape her investment? What does the learner perceive as the benefits of investment? How can the capital she possesses serve as affordances of investment? So here we have Henrietta, who has knowledge of digital cameras, and how does this connect with her investment in the language and literacy practices of her community? And what about systemic patterns of control, policies, codes, institutional practices, which constrain or enable investment? What practices enable people to grow? What practices limit growth on behalf of learners, students, and teachers? So let's look at an example. Let's do a little bit of a comparison between Henrietta in Uganda and Ayrton in Canada. And I asked the question, to what extent are language learners invested in the language and literacy practices of a given classroom or community? Now, we know Henrietta is a 17-year-old female student in a rural village in Uganda. No running water, limited electricity, and people earn less than $1 a day. There are huge inequities between urban and rural areas with limited access to technology. At the same time, they are learning about HIV/AIDS and how the digital resources can provide innovative access. She says, the computer can help me get a job, get me job opportunities in my future, because nowadays needs to be with an experienced computer. And I want to talk with people from different countries to join the group of knowledgeable people in the world. She says, I want to become mentally modernized. I want to learn about the behaviors of other girls outside Uganda, to know about female bodies, how they look like. And I think the crucial question here is this concept, a fascinating concept of being mentally modernized. What is the digital offer that other forms of cultural practice may not? Well, let's look at Ayrton, a young 16-year-old Filipino male in a wealthy neighborhood in Vancouver. He came to Canada in the immigrant class he was an immigrant family who came through the investor class program. And he was involved in research on digital literacy in home settings with learners with different socioeconomic backgrounds. So Ayrton was able to enroll in a course during the summer and learn how to become a currency trader, even though he was only 16 years old. And he says, it was one of the greatest investments of my life. He says, technology has been that bridge that connects me to people as far as Orlando in the United States or people back in the Philippines. He says, with how the world is just connected and how information is at your fingertips, you can be anyone or anything you want. And it's just right there. So what we see here is, in fact, two very different experiences of the world. We see, in terms of positioning, we see a rural, urban, Ugandan girl as opposed to an urban, upper middle class Canadian boy. In terms of systemic patterns of control, in Uganda, there's a high cost of technology, major issues with connectivity. But in Canada, there's a solid technological infrastructure. With regard to affordances and benefits of investment, there are limited resources that prohibit access. Whereas in Canada, Ayrton has access to devices 24 hours out of 7 days a week and many digital role models. In terms of the sans pratique, the way they develop their skills, we know that Henrietta has developing skills, but we know that Ayrton has highly developed skills, and he can become a currency trader because nobody has any idea he's only 16 years old. So we see that both students are highly invested in the language practices of this digital world. But Henrietta experiences systemic constraints, while Ayrton actually has many opportunities not available to Henrietta. So what do we do about these inequities in the social world? This is what's taken me into, in fact, open access, freely available digital stories that can be used for literacy and language learners and language learning. Because there are so many people who actually want to enter the digital world, but don't have the resources and the access to language materials in their communities. So this got me involved in a project initially called the African Storybook. There was this, which still exists, the African Storybook Project, which is interested in harnessing the power of technology to promote investment in multilingualism. So how do we use not only technology, but freely available technology in order to ensure that people in different parts of the world have access to stories and materials and linguistic diversity that they would not otherwise have. And so we see the journey that goes from the African Storybook to Storybooks Canada. And in fact, you can just open up your cell phones right now and you can just type in storybookscanada.ca, and this will take you directly to our projects. I've been very fortunate to work with an amazing team of people, Tessa Welch in South Africa, who led the African Storybook Project, Julia Tembe in Uganda, who worked with teachers, Espen Stranger Johansen from Norway, who is still active in our project, Sam Ndema, who works from Uganda, but works in Tanzania, and who does remarkable work. So we are, in fact, an international team, but with one vision of open access and social change. So the African Storybook, africanstorybook.net, has over 3,500 unique stories and over 7,000 translations, over 200 African languages, as well as English, French, and Portuguese. So what we did here in Canada is that we repurposed 40 of these stories to be used in our Storybooks project. So as I said, storybookscanada.ca is a free open educational resource that promotes literacy and language learning in homes, schools, and communities. It makes 40 stories from the African Storybook available with text and audio. You can listen in English, French, and the most widely spoken immigrant and refugee languages of Canada. We are also developing Indigenous storybooks and global storybooks. This is the wonderful team of people. Sarah Davidson, Monica Shank-Lau, Asma Afrien. I'm there, Ingrid Schechter, Liam Doherty, and missing is Espen Stranger Johansson and Michelle Gilman. Here we have a little image of the Global Storybooks portal, and in fact, I'm going to take you to that site, globalstorybooks.net. You can also get onto your cell phones and just look at globalstorybooks.net at the many sites we have freely available across the global community. We work from Arabic to Zulu, and we have freely available digital sites, in fact, now in over 50 languages and many, many more. We have stories for children, Counting Animals. We have stories for youth, and Andiswe Stocker Star. We have stories for adults, The Day I Left Home for the City. We have stories in many different languages that also draw on some classic fairy tales, and they're available in print and audio, and this you're going to see as being really important in terms of language learning. And I, working with my team, have done a great deal of research on these storybooks. To what extent do the parallel text, so we've translated stories from one language into another language, and we have a very faithful kind of translation of that story. And how do these parallel texts promote language learning? And you can toggle from one language to another. And how does it create language awareness? How does it build multilingual identity? And how do stories travel from one region of the world to another? What are diverse readers' investments? How can school teachers use global storybooks to promote multilingual literacy in classes where many languages are spoken? How can they build homeschool connections? And what challenges do translators face? If you look, for example, a paper that we've just published in 2022, you see the complexity of translation, that often it takes many people to be involved in the translation process. Not only the translator, but the editor, the proofreader, the reader are all active in translation. We see, for example, I've got an article I wrote in the Modern Language Journal on language teacher identity. And this looked at the African Storybook Project in Uganda. What is Monica's investment in the African Storybook? And how does investment provide insight into her language teacher identity? For example, if you take one of the stories called Andiswe Soccer Star, it's about a young student, a young girl who wanted to play soccer, but was told that she couldn't play soccer because it was only for boys. But when somebody fell sick, one of the boys fell sick, they decided to let her play, and she scored the winning goal. So that's a wonderful story about social change. And the teacher says, it really helped me. It changed the attitudes of boys, where they could think that a girl is not supposed to play football. But this time when I go for my physical education lesson, when I prepare a lesson about football, they don't now complain. They don't kick the ball away from the girls. They just play together like that. This time they've started attitude change. It helped me a lot. So the stories can also shift attitudes of young people. Even in Canada, we have French immersion classes. And what teachers told us is that even though the stories are African stories, children could really relate to the stories. Because, for example, one of the teachers said, in my class, we did Counting Animals. And one of my students was particularly really happy about it because she comes from Pakistan. And she was like, oh, well, I see lots of different animals that maybe you guys never saw before. And she started to talk about these different animals. And then the other one just added on about different animals. I think it makes them more secure to talk about it because we saw these animals that are in Africa. So I come from another place and I saw other things, so I can talk about it. Like everybody's talking about the bears. So the point being that with this young girl, she had come to Canada from Pakistan, and she wanted to talk about animals in Pakistan. But, you know, she thought maybe she has to talk about bears in Canada. But when she sees a story from Africa that looks at all the different African animals, she thinks, let me tell people about animals in Pakistan. She feels it's legitimate to talk about animals from her country because it's not only about animals in Canada. It also forms very strong homeschool connections. The teacher said it's helpful for teachers, but for parents as well. I can use one story if I have maybe a student who's struggling with reading or something like that, and I can send the link to the parent in the mother tongue, and maybe the parent can read or help at home. So because these are all freely available, it's not only the teachers that can use it or the children, but their parents as well. And the parents can actually read the story in multiple languages. So thank you for this part of my story, everybody. And I am now going to change direction a little bit. And what I'd like to do is take you to the site, these sites, so you can get a little bit of a sense of the Global Storybooks Project and Storybooks Canada and Storybooks English Language Learners. So let me take you to the Global Storybooks portal. So as I said, all you need to do is look at globalstorybooks.net. So Global Storybooks is a free multilingual literacy resource for language teachers and learners of all ages. Read, teach, download, and listen to illustrated stories in many languages. Check out our featured sites, our language teaching resources, and our community projects. We also have frequently asked questions. So if you look at our featured sites, we've got a site for African languages, Storybooks Canada, Indigenous languages, youth and adults, Mexico, Norway, and Zambia. And these were developed by our core team and collaborators. And most of these have their own URL. But we also have language teaching resources. We have language teaching resources in Arabic, in Chinese, in English, in French, in German, in Spanish, and Swahili. But we also have community projects for countries throughout the world, from Afghanistan to Bangladesh to Brazil to Denmark, East Timor, Florida, Germany, Ghana, Haiti, the Himalayas, Hungary, Jamaica, Kenya, Korea, Liberia, Mali, Mauritius, Minnesota, Nigeria, Pakistan, Quebec, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Sweden, Tanzania, Uganda. We've only just developed one very recently for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian diaspora. We don't as yet have a site for Thailand because we have not as yet had volunteers to translate all the stories into Thai. But if there's anybody interested in translating these stories into Thai, we would be very happy to share our translation materials with you. So let's have a look at Storybooks Canada, because Storybooks Canada is the most well-developed of our sites. And you can easily access it on storybookscanada.ca. One thing that you'll know, first of all, is that there are many languages here on the site: English, French, and Arabic, Bengali, Cantonese, German, Italian, and so forth. And I know that I checked with Dr. Yusuf, and he said that there were quite a number of languages spoken by people who come to the PSU Open Mobility. There are people who speak Chinese, Korean, Japanese, French, Arabic. And so you see many of these languages are on our site. We also have different levels. So we have some simpler stories. You'll see here like counting animals, feelings, fire. And as you move through our 40 stories, you see these are all level 1. Then you end up with level 2 stories, Tom the Banana Seller, Decision. We have Ndiswe Soccer Star. We have a very tall man at level 2. And then we have a level 3, The Day I Left Home for the City. So there you have adults involved. What Vuzi's sister said, which is level 4. You have Grandma's Bananas, level 4. Holidays with Grandmother. We have Simbekwe, level 5, and Magozwe, level 5. So we have stories of all these different levels. But what I'd like to show you, let me see, maybe I'll take you to Tom the Banana Seller. Because what we see here is that you have these stories that are available. Now, this is the level 2 story. And so we have fairly simple language, but it's also available in audio. So I'm going to play the audio. I hope that this works, everybody, so that people can follow on along by reading the story and also listening to it as well.
Tom the Banana Seller. Tom carries a tray of ripe bananas. Tom goes to the market to sell bananas. People at the market are buying fruit. But no one is buying Tom's bananas. They prefer to buy fruit from women. In our community, only women sell fruit, people say. What kind of a man is this? People ask. But Tom does not give up. He calls, "Buy my bananas. Buy my sweet, ripe bananas." One woman picks up a bunch of bananas from the tray. She looks at the bananas carefully. The woman buys the bananas. More people come to the stall. They buy Tom's bananas and eat them. Soon, the tray is empty. Tom counts the money he earned. Then Tom buys soap, sugar, and bread. He puts the things in his tray. Tom balances the tray on his head and goes home.
Okay, so that's a lovely, very simple story that I think many people could relate to, but you can also make that available in other languages as well. So if we look, for example, I think Arabic was one language some people may be familiar with. So we have the story in Arabic. So we might, for example, play it over here.
يحمل توم طبق الموز الناضج.
But you can play it, you can indicate it what it is in English. Tom carries a tray of ripe bananas, or in French. So that might be, that's a very helpful resource. Let's think, perhaps there's another language. How about, I think, Japanese, one of those languages? Let's perhaps look at Japanese. Let's look at Chinese. Here we go, Mandarin. Should we look at Mandarin? And okay, we'll see. We'll go down to a little bit further down. How about this one?
很多人去集市上买水果。
Okay, there we have English. People at the market are buying fruit, and we have French. Okay, so that's a wonderful resource. What is also very helpful, I'm going to go back to English, is that we have download options so that you can download these stories in different formats. So that if, for example, let's say, you want to, you can download it in a regular PDF format, or you can download it in a wordless format. And then children can write, or people can write their own stories. They can look at the image and then they can write their own story. So that's a lot of fun. Or for those who are very creative, they can they can read the story, but then draw their own pictures. And if you're interested in bilingual PDFs, for example, here we have English and French. So I can show you in landscape form what that looks like. So here we have Tom the banana seller and Tom le vendeur de banane. So, you can print these out and make them freely available to children, their parents, and the community more broadly. What we also have with Storybooks Canada here is we can learn a little bit about our team, but let's have a look at the resources that we have. We have Asma Afreen talking about translator identity. We have videos and audios that are freely available. We have articles that we've published. Here we have an article, Global Storybooks for Multilingual UK Classrooms. We also have videos, Bonny Norton, a video that I made on the Global Storybooks project, or Asma Afreen on how to use the website, or Sarah Davidson on Indigenous storybooks, and so forth. So we have lots of wonderful resources. This is Sarah Davidson. That we picked up that, which is wonderful, but that might take a little bit of time. So I think, well, maybe we can see. I might just go back on that one. And a page, let's just wait here. Here we go. What we also have in terms of teaching resources, which is actually very helpful, is look at the word list that we have. So if you've got, let's look at a more complicated story. Let's look at a holidays with grandmother. So we've got a word list so that if people are interested in teaching the story, they can look at this word list. They say words that I already know, new words, and words that are available in the story. So those, that's a very helpful device, very helpful resource. We can go back and have a look also at, let's go back a little bit over here. We also have closed tests. So, just to test people's audio comprehension. So let's look at, the day I left home for the city. Okay. So what we have here, if we begin. So what we have here is that people listen to the text, and then they have to fill in the missing word. So the small bus stop in my village was something with people and overloaded buses. On the ground were even more things to load. Touts were shouting the names where their buses were going. So let's play that.
The small bus stop in my village was busy with people and overloaded buses.
Okay. And
on
so
the ground, there were even more things to load.
Okay. So you've got to pick up the chosen word. The small bus stop in my village was busy, right? So, it helps people to identify as a listening test, whether they can identify what they hear with what they see. And this is all freely available on the site. So that might be very helpful to you. And we also, in fact, have for teachers, a Storybooks Canada teaching guide for teachers. So this particular teaching guide here we have taken 8 stories. And what it does in this teaching guide is it gives you a sense of, these are the stories that we've chosen: counting animals, feelings at level 1, Collide talks to plants and punishment, level 2, chicken and millipede and hen and eagle at level 3, and grandma's bananas and Magoswe at level 4. So what we've done here is I'll take you through here. We have different exercises, different activities that you can do as teachers, different comprehension exercises that you can do, discussion sessions, grammar exercises that might be helpful. You can learn how to navigate the sites and how to improve your reading comprehension. And you have vocabulary, you have writing exercises. So this is all freely available. And this is something, so for example, if we look at counting animals over here, you can see that there's a navigation tool, there's story reading, there's comprehension, there's first people's principles, there's oral grammar and activities. So I hope, that would be something that would be very helpful to you. And let's see what other materials might be. Okay, so that is, of course, about the Storybooks Canada site. I think what I might do is also take you to my website. This is Bonny Norton, because, this again is freely available. And so what I have on this particular site are a whole range of publications that might be helpful to you. Those that deal with books and special issues, you just go onto those links. Those that look at journal articles, I've certainly published more recently than this, but these are the ones that I've managed to get up onto my site. Research tasks on identity in language learning and teaching. And I did a piece on English language institutes in Iran, investment in language learning. So, do check these out, everybody. There's a lot there that might be helpful. So those are the journal articles, and these here are, chapters in books. So I know that, when I was a student, it was sometimes difficult to get hold of the articles that were meaningful to you and helped you with your research. And so I've put these up on my website, and I certainly hope that, these might be helpful to you. So I think I've covered, let's see if I've covered, there was one other site I wanted to show you. So if you didn't want to use the Storybooks Canada site, what I want to show you is another site. I'll just take you to it here, which is on the Global Storybooks portal. And this is one of our language teaching resources sites. So if you didn't want to use the Storybooks Canada site, you could simply go to the site that says Storybooks for Learners of English. Okay, so what do we see on that site? You just pull it up. So you'll see the 40 stories here. And you can certainly scroll through those and, figure out which stories you might like to use in your classes. And then under languages, we've got all the languages that we have available, within our Global Storybooks project, from Bengali, Italian, Persian, Polish, and also many, many more languages here. So this takes you through to all these languages and check to see, how many of these languages may be helpful to you. So I see we've got Malagasy here. And Spanish might be something people are familiar with. Urdu, perhaps. So there we have all those sites. And it also has a section on how to use the website, how to read stories, how to listen to stories, how to download stories. And here we also have how you listen to stories, how you download them, and you can download the PDF at the same time. So I think what I'm going to do over there, I think I'm going to stop sharing, everybody, because my hope is that there may be a good number of questions that people have, comments that you might like to share, and I can certainly take you to more of the stories, but I think, my hope is that there may be some questions that people have and comments that they might not like to share at this point. So let's open it up for a wider discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Norton. To me, I'm so happy to see your, gigantic project that you have, shown us that what have been done by you and your team about the storybook project. So now I would like to open the floors for our participant to ask question, or you want to discuss what animators that you have listened to, or you want to share your experience with our to our platform right now. So now our time for discussion and Q&A.
I'm going to actually open up the chat just in case some people might want to write their questions in the chat. So please feel free to do that. But otherwise, please, if you have comments and questions, Dr. Hualater can, you can ask the questions also in Thai if you wish. I'm sure that Dr. Hualater can actually translate those for me.
Oh, yes.
Is that correct? So
Yes.
Please feel free to ask your questions in Thai. They don't have to be in English. So not to worry about that. Or any comments that you have.
Yeah, because some of our listeners are our students. So if you are reluctant to ask in English, so why not in our local language in Thai? So, and then, yeah, we can make a translation. Please. Any? If not, I think let me summarize, because I have taken some notes during your presentation.
Excuse me, Ajahn Badin, there is one question from Viam, I guess.
Okay, please. Oh, from Viam Dollar. Okay. Yeah, Viam, please.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf and Dr. Badin. Okay, so my question is that do you have any plan to expand your translation team in the future? I mean, like, do you have any plan for collaborate from other countries to get more translated languages? Okay. Because I see from the website there are still more languages to translate, and it's really interesting. I saw the stories, and for me, I'm interested in Arabic, and I go through that version, and I see it's easy to understand and to like take it as class materials for the students. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that question. Because at UBC we're a small team, and so we rely a great deal on volunteers in terms of translators, because we can't, we've actually used a lot of our translators have been graduate students at the University of British Columbia, and they've been very generous in doing translations for us. And we already, as I think we've got at least over 65 languages that we've translated the stories into. But, yes, as you say, there are many other languages in the world, and a lot depends on whether or not people, come forward to volunteer. We have developed a translation website, a translation app. So it makes the translations very easy. Well, relatively easy. I know nothing is simple. I realize that. But because it's a digital translator, you will, we can share that with you. If there's anybody, in your community is interested in translating into Thai or another local language, we can share our translation app with you, and then we can upload that language. So it's just a question of inviting. That's why we consider these collaborations. We've done a huge amount of work already with our small team, but in order to advance, we need collaboration. And many people, for example, when we worked with Madagascar, in Madagascar, they got funding from their Ministry of Education and then did translations into local languages. And these are now available in Storybooks Madagascar. So, so that's why we have sites where there is community sites where people have actually found their own funding or even volunteered their time to do translations. And so if there's anybody there who would like to do translations for us, just email me and let me know, and I'll put you in touch with one of my former students who actually will send you all the relevant sites, and we would be more than happy to do that. So thank you very much. That's why it's like an ongoing project, because as soon as I give talks and people get excited and they want to see their work translated, they come forward, we send the translation app to them, and the next thing they've got stories up. So I hope that excites you. And I do see there are some other questions. Yes, sorry.
No, I just say thank you so much.
Okay, and so here we have another one. Thank you for your talk. I would like to ask.
I think I saw one hand right there.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, from Itza, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Norton, for your very insightful talk. My name is Itza. I'm a PhD student at the University of Sydney, and my research looks at language teacher identity. And I'm especially interested in the notion of imagined identities. I was wondering whether current research to date has actually examined the actual enactment of imagined identities in, let's say, teachers' future practice. Because it seems to me that current research has tended to look at the future-oriented perspectives of imagined identities rather than actually, conducting longitudinal research to look at the actual enactment of imagined identities. What is your view on that?
Well, that's a fabulous. You said you're at the University of Sydney?
Yeah, and my supervisors are Dr. Marie Stevenson and Professor Brian Partridge.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, these are fabulous people. That's really very exciting. That's really great. Okay, so yes, I think that the issue around language teacher identity is an absolutely fascinating one. And in fact, Peter da Costa, who is the editor of the TESOL, co-editor of the TESOL Quarterly, he and I did a special issue of the Modern Language Journal on language teacher identity, and that was in 2017. So that was a fascinating, it was fascinating to kind of check that out. And in fact, for the journal Language Teaching, I was just asked a couple of weeks ago to review, somebody's done a state-of-the-art article on language teacher identity. And, if you write to me, I can, I'm sure that I would be able to put you in touch with the author who will then share it with you. So, it's on language teacher identity, but imagined identities is a fascinating topic. And I think that I think people could actually, more research could be done on the imagined identities of language teachers and, in a sense, how they shift and change over time. And I think some longitudinal research would actually be very interesting. I think that Gary Barkhuizen, he wrote a piece in the TESOL Quarterly in 2016, and I think that was pretty much around issues around language teacher identity. And he did quite a very interesting study that covered the experiences of a teacher over 10 years. So that was an amazing longitudinal study. But certainly more research is needed. And so yes, go and check it out. Write to me and I can send you some more references.
Yeah,
I'd be certainly happy to.
I'm actually conducting a systematic literature review right now that I'm about to finish. So I'm not sure if my review would have some similarities or some differences to the other
Yeah.
we could talk about. So I would be very
Yeah.
interested to learn more about that. Thank you so much.
No problem. Please, that let's keep talking. Okay. And is there another question here? I see. I would like to ask regarding the construct of ideology in the model of investment. What ideologies or model of investment are trying to fight against? How does it transpire in the Storybook project? That's a really, really good question. It's a very good question. You see, the issue of ideology, it really speaks to, in a sense, what are people's beliefs, and in a sense, who is included and excluded from, the social practices of a given society. Now, remember I showed you the story that was on Diswe Soccer Star, and about the girl who wanted to play soccer and was told, no, you can't play soccer because it's for boys. And then she kind of, she said, but okay, a boy got sick, and so she was allowed to play, and then she scored the winning goal. So what you see here is a shift that story, raises some very interesting, issues around gender equality, in the role of women and men in society, and it pushes against ideologies of patriarchal ideologies. So you could see people in terms of investment, a young woman who's reading that story, who will read it and say, wow, I never ever thought that I could play soccer. Maybe that's something I could do. My brother always plays soccer. Why not me? And so, so they can develop an investment, right, in sporting activities, and possibly start asking for those opportunities, and possibly shift ideological practices for young, women and young men in their society. Because you also have to bring the men on board. The girls might want to play soccer, but you've got to make sure that the boys are also supportive so that they can kind of work together. So, issues of ideology, are very important. And you can certainly see that in the Storybooks project in terms of, many, not all the stories speak to issues of ideology, but a good number of them do, address issues of poverty, for example, of intergenerational communication, of issues of social justice. So I think you'd find that interesting. So
Yeah,
I see another question. How can we contribute to write stories if we aren't part of the team? You are part of the team. Everybody's part of the team. You'll just have to write to us, right? Well, not so much. We're not looking for new stories. What we're looking for are new translators, because we've got a cohort of stories, 40 of them, and what we do is that we try to translate them into as many languages in the world as possible. Now, you can write your own stories. For example, remember I told you when you download a story, if you could have the image, and you can write your own stories. And, we also have, when we call that this is open access, it's not only the stories that are freely available, the whole site, the software behind the site is also freely available. So if you want to develop a whole new site with a whole set of new stories, you can do that. And so what we do then is to say, this is the software that we've developed, and that's freely available. And you can create your own site with your own stories. And we would be more than happy to share that with you. So you can let us know. So let's see another question. It aligns with post-structuralism that fights against colonial ideologies related to gender, race, and other inequalities. Yeah, so post-structuralism really does see that the central idea in post-structuralist thought is that what it does is that it does away with binaries, in a sense, good, bad, motivated, unmotivated. It sees things as a lot more complex, as a lot more interrelated. but it also addresses issues of power. How is power implicated in all these, in the collapsing of these binaries, rural, urban, right? So yes, it is absolutely related to issues of equality, and it certainly does align with issues of post-structuralism. And, you know, again, you can have a look on my website. I've written a couple of articles on post-structuralism, one in 2013, I think it was, and then another one in 2020, which I haven't yet uploaded, but check it out, because it explores post-structuralist theory and post-structuralist ideas. And it's about, in a sense, who controls knowledge, you know, who controls, you know, what is considered legitimate or what is considered illegitimate. So it does look at issues of power, I think in a very, I think in very important ways for education. Let's see here. Are there any other hands that went up here? Let's see. Are there other hands?
Actually, I have another question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it relates to the issue, the concept of post-structuralism that you just mentioned. So I was wondering, you know, since the central idea of post-structuralism is to destabilize the dichotomy, but if we take a look at current research on whether language teacher identity or learner identity, much of the existing research out there is still, you know, rooted in the dichotomy. So I was wondering whether, you know, while on the one hand, much research has been grounded in post-structuralism, but while in current practice, there is still a lot going on about the distinction between native and non-native.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is such an interesting point. Thank you for that. It's a, you know, I teach a graduate course here at UBC, and I also teach a doctoral seminar. And we often talk about the fact that even though post-structuralism certainly has become quite a powerful ideology and set of ideas in the field, it doesn't mean that it supplants the other ideas. You know, ideas coexist. You know, and that there's a reason for that, because, you know, if I talk, for example, about issues of investment, you know, it's a language that teachers may not be familiar with, right? So I need to explain it relative to a language that people are familiar with, like motivation. So I'm not saying investment is necessarily better than motivation. I'm saying that the two coexist. They're asking different kinds of questions, and they give us a different lens through which to look at our students, through which to examine our data. And you know, even if you look, for example, at the native, non-native speaker, right? You know, around teacher identity, we might like to say that we need to collapse those ideas. We need to forget about the non-native speaker. We all are teachers. But then you go and you apply for a job, and then somebody says, you're not really a native speaker, are you? Right? So it's like, wait a minute, don't you know we don't talk about that anymore? They said, sorry, we do. Yeah, you know. So, you know, it's like, so, you know, so there are ideas that, you know, coexist, and it's a bit of a struggle, you know, and that's where post-structuralism comes in. It's a struggle over which ideas are you know, become more powerful in a given community. So even though I think that certainly we have challenged the ideas, you know, around the native speaker, non-native speaker, at the same time, you know, there are many parts of the world where people say, you know, that's all very well, but I've got to pass the TOEFL test, I've got to pass the IELTS test, and that is all standard English. So I want to know standard English, because if I don't know standard English, I'm not going to get into university, you know, and wherever that might be. So, you know, we can raise issues, we can debate issues, we can try and shift, you know, the discourse, but that doesn't mean that it supplants many ideas. And so that's why there's a constant struggle over which ideas are taken to be, we can sometimes, at least we can often shift debates. We can at least say, you know, that non-native speakers have a lot to offer. You know, often they understand the grammar a lot better than native speakers. They understand the experiences of students. They understand a range of languages, for example. You know, they have a lot to contribute. So one makes the argument that even if you want to talk about that native, non-native speakers, let's also consider what non-native speakers have to offer, so to speak, right? So, you know, just look at, for example, there's this new work on new materialism. I don't know if you know that work. So new materialism, or sometimes called post-humanism, these are ideas that are, you know, have some traction in the field. People are talking about what is the relationship between the human and the, you know, and the non-human, so to speak. And, you know, Kelly Toohey, Alistair Pennycook, sitting in Sydney, in fact, he talks about this. So, but some people have never heard of it. You talk about new materialism, they say, what? You know, because it's a big field and people are doing different things. And, you know, sometimes people feel, wow, these ideas are pretty interesting and they're important for the kind of work I'm doing. So I must read more. Other people say, yeah, that's interesting for you, but these are the ideas that are interesting to me. So it's not really that we want to say this is good and this is bad, but it's rather how can we collectively work together, you know, to improve, you know, language learning and teaching, applied linguistics. And that's why, you know, the New London group, not the New London group, the Douglas Fir group, I was part of this group in 2000. I think we published the article in, I think it was 2016. There's a whole group of us got together to talk about how do we reconceptualize second language acquisition at the macro level, at the meso level, and at the micro level. And, you know, and recognizing there are many, many different ways of understanding language and learning. So, you know, you know, I you know, teaching humbles me because, you know, I think I have all, you know, I think I've got a lot of answers, but in fact, I don't. I mean, I have some answers. I don't have all the answers. And that's, you know, because we're always constantly learning and we're always, you know, learning new ideas, sharing new ideas and doing research. And as we do research, you know, we share that research and we try and shift the borders of the field somewhat.
Thank you very much.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Professor, I think there are some more questions in our chat box.
Okay, let me have a look. I see there are 2 new messages. Here we go. Okay. Okay, right. So it's a light work. We've done that one. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Professor. Motivation can evaporate and so can investment, I guess. So what can language teachers do to sustain investment? Well, you know, the interesting thing is, it's very true that people can be invested in the language practices of a community, but then they can find, for example, that maybe this community is sexist or racist or homophobic. And so the question is, what can language teachers do? You know, very often, you know, teachers don't even know what conversations go on in their classes. They know what is public in their classes, but they don't know what happens in the corridors. They don't know what happens on the sports field. They don't know what happens in people's homes. So, you know, this is one of the reasons why I think it's helpful to try to get to know students as best one can. Of course, there are always going to be limits to what we know about our students. But when I give assignments to students, what I try to do is always, is to learn about the students through the assignments. You know, I might say to them, let's listen to this YouTube video and tell me how you read that video, given your own location, you know, as a, you know, it could be as a teacher, as a scholar, it could be as a young person, it could be as a male, could be as a female student. How do you read, how do you understand that video? And the reason why I do that is because I want to get to know my students better. Because once I get to know them better, I can try and meet their needs, and I can try and understand their investments. And I have a lot of fun actually in my classes. One of the things I've discovered in the grad class I'm teaching at the moment at UBC is music. You know, in the middle of my 3-hour class, so yesterday I was teaching for 3 hours, the day before I was teaching for 3 hours, so it's exhausting. But in the middle of a 3-hour class, we have a break. And during the break, we take it in turns. Somebody brings food, and now for the first time, somebody brings music. And I'm absolutely fascinated, not only in the food people bring, it's always great, you know, people bring different foods and talk about why it's meaningful to them, but the music we listen to is fantastic. I've learned all about Harry Styles. I didn't know about Harry Styles. I don't know if you know about Harry Styles. I didn't know about Harry Styles. I know everything about Harry Styles now, you know. So it's, you know, it's like, wow, okay, so what are their investments? And how can I adapt my teaching, at least to some extent, to actually meet, you know, those interests? So it's an ongoing process. You know, it's you know, every single time I learn, one of my students said to me yesterday, Bonnie, we never know what to expect in your class. And that's because every class I try to do something a little bit different. I try to bring a new perspective in, you know, I try to bring in new materials so that, you know, there's a new angle. And this is how I hope to sustain investment. And it's hard work. As we all know, we're all teachers. So here we have another one. So I hope that made sense. Professor Norton, is tension in language learner or teacher identity construction theorized in the model of investment? Well, yes, that's very interesting, because that model of investment we first developed as a model to understand learning. But that model of investment can absolutely be used to understand teacher identity. And in fact, I've just written a paper and it's freely available. I'm so excited. I've managed to get some money to make it freely available. It was done, I wrote it with Asma Afreen, and it's in the new journal. It's called Educational Linguistics. And it's it's now available. I could take you to it, but I don't want to share screen right now. I might, if we have time, I might take you to it. But it's about Bangla and the identity of the heritage language teacher. So this is Bangla. This is the heritage language teaching. So check it out, because we absolutely do look at the model of investment to understand language teacher identity. And, you know, that, as I say, I'm working with, you know, Asma Afreen and we've made a lot of progress. It's because it's a kind of, the model helps one to try and understand the relationship between language, identity, capital, and ideology. So, you know, it looks basically at the relationship between the individual and the social world, but collapses to some extent those binaries, and also considers, you know, issues of ideology as central. So, you know, check that out. Check out that article on education that's available, freely available now in the journal. Lee Wei from the UK is the editor of that journal, and it's in the very first journal, the very first issue that came out. It's by Asma Afreen and Bonny Norton. Just Google it. You can, freely available. Okay. So thank you. I agree, it's hard work. Oh, wow. But it's fun, really. You know, one thing about teaching that we all know is that if your students enjoy the classes, you enjoy the classes. So in the end, it's in our best interests to actually promote students' investment in the language practices of our classroom. Because if students enjoy our classes, we enjoy our classes. So that's why I do it. Because, you know, if I see students starting to nod off, or they don't seem that interested, or, you know, I feel bad as a teacher. So I'm constantly trying to, you know, ensure that I have interesting materials, interesting questions, interesting assignments, especially assignments. That for me is very important, because students know that the assignments, you know, will determine their grades. So I always try and make sure that the assignments are very interesting so that they enjoy doing them and I enjoy marking them. And so far, so good. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Norton, I love your last few sentences. You say, if students enjoy learning, we enjoy teaching. Yeah,
Exactly.
so that's a mutual benefit.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay. So any other questions you might have? If not, I think because time is running out, let me see. I have some few more during listening to your lecture. I have made some, you know, let's say, you know, taking some notes. You say
Yeah.
that you start with, let me give you, let me summarize all the lectures that you have done. So we say that we have to thanks to the technology that connecting us for today's session. And of course, it's related to your work later on. And then a series of book and article published in various journals that you mentioned earlier, and that you start with, and you reveals your, you know, qualitative research works on language power and identity, you know, and the factors might affect a learner of English. Let's say, yeah, this is I like the most. Yeah, you say about motivation, aspiration, investment. This is about individual needs and paces of learning. And about identity, yes, and then you try to open the doors in later on of your lecture, and how to balance it among learners and teachers, right? And about teaching methodologies and approaches, and formal standard of English and cultural belief that you embrace in your study. You know, and then in the digital era, you try to connect that people are connect each other from all corners of the world, and it is about decentralization and accessibility to learning of English, you know, much more easier. So, and then economical factor play a crucial role to embrace technology. It is a major component to connect to the language, and of course, it is an investment, both about owning the technology and also about using efforts to acquire the knowledge. And it is not only learning the language, but also about other contents of from the internet. You say that how you can check the African people can check their, you know, girlfriend from other parts of the world, and etc. So, and these are interrelated between these two 4 points, you know, identity, capital, positioning, and ideology, and it needs investment. So, and then you relate it about to the story project books, which is about Africa and Canada teams, and which is translated into 65 languages, if I'm not mistaken, right? Online, right? So the stories are all, you know, for all many target audiences, and it promotes multilingual literacy through storytelling. So the book, the storybook shares different views of cultural identities of non-native speakers of English through learning English. Inclusiveness is important, and embracing local cultures and learning English with local context. So the website is globalstorybooks.net, right? So yeah, it is about, you know, learning English, you know, by embracing local context across the world, which is familiar to the learners, because this is about their culture, right? The non-native speakers of English enjoy learning English based on their cultural values, not the Western culture. The project recognizes the variety of learners' cultural identity, and it takes as a major mechanism in learning English. So a learner may enjoy learning the target language because you have an audio file and clips and photos and together with text, and have interaction that between the machine and the learners, and it is about a safe study mode, right? So the project is also useful for teachers of English by adopting the website as a great resource of teaching. So you have a teacher's guide as well, so which is great. So I think this is I think I missed some other website and links that you mentioned in your slide. So I think this is such a great platform of learning globalstorybooks.net, which is your global project that you mentioned in your your lesson, right? So now I think if we have no other question, I would like all our audience to to fill the form that Dr. Yusuf will put in our chat box, and spell out your name correctly and your last name as well, because it will appear on your certificates, and the certificate also will be sent to your mailbox after this. And then don't miss out another project that we may have, PSU Open Mobility next week, on March of 8th of March, which is about cultural citizenship development in English language teachers education programs. So yeah, this is just stay tuned with us and enjoy our PSU Open Mobility 2022. So thank you very much, Dr. Norton, for sharing your experience. And I think we have learned a lot of ideas. You open up our views in order to how to get inclusiveness of our learners of English from all corners of the world. So now I will give the floor to Dr. Yusuf for the closing. Dr. Yusuf.
So again, thank you very much, Professor Bonny Norton, for your sharing and contributing your knowledge and experience today. We have learned so many things, and on behalf of the organizer, we hope that we will be able to, we will have a chance to invite you again, maybe next year.
Thank you very much. I had a lot of fun, and I'm very delighted. We had such wonderful questions. I'm sure we'll bump into you at conferences, and certainly if I ever when I travel back to Thailand, I'll certainly get in touch. But I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and to have a conversation. Yes, and I really do hope that people will, check out globalstorybooks.net, and there's also, storybookscanada.ca. There are many resources, because that's the most, we've had that site for the longest, but check it out, share it with others. And because, this is, we want to get the news out about this wonderful resource. But so yeah, and I wish you well. I think you're doing a fantastic job with this open mobility. It's really amazing. You sharing with people in different parts of the world, people enjoying coming in, and it's a real contribution. So thank you very much for contributing to a global conversation.
Yeah, so thank you very much again for everyone for your actively participation. And we would like to welcome you for our next session on the 8th of March again. So we hope to see you there again. So everyone, please have a nice day. And thank you again, Professor Bonny Norton.
Thank you. Now I can go and have dinner. Good night, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah,
good night, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So everyone, please complete your survey as well, because your feedback is very important for us. Aจารย์บดินทร์ thank you ครับขอบคุณครับอาจารย์วัชรินทร์ขอบคุณครับผมเจออาจารย์ด้วยวันนี้
ขอบคุณทุกท่านครับวันนี้รู้สึกมีความสุขมากครับ
สบายดีครับอาจารย์สบายดีครับ
ขอบคุณทุกท่านค่ะขอบคุณท่านอาจารย์
ทุกท่านช่วยกรอกแบบประเมินให้นิดนึงนะครับผมจะได้นำไปปรับปรุงแก้ไขต่อไปครับผมขอบคุณครับ
ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
ครับขอบคุณครับอาจารย์สุธิดาครับ Yes
there is one participant mentioned that she, I believe, cannot access to the survey. Probably she's off Thailand.
Yeah, maybe, okay. Maybe, let me check.
Parawati Siti Sondari in the chat box.
I can access the Parawati. Okay.
She's in Indonesia.
Yeah,
She
that's the same problem because as we, faced last time.
session, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Parawati.
Yeah. What about the certificate?
I think she can access that. Probably.
Okay อาจารย์ยูซุฟโอเคแล้วนะ
ครับผมโอเคครับ
โอเคขอบคุณทุกคนมากครับ ที่ให้โอกาสได้มาแชร์ได้มาร่วมวงวิชาการ
มีคำถามจากคุณชลวัฒน์จากขอนแก่นว่าสามารถรับชมวิดีโอย้อนหลังได้ที่ไหนคะอาจารย์ยูซุฟ
I try to send the message but it's not in the meeting now. Okay, now direct message. Okay. No, I cannot send her message.
Parawati, I try.
Yeah, normally I will upload the videos on my Facebook. Yeah. อาจารย์ชลวัฒน์ยังอยู่ไหมครับ Yeah. I think he or she left the meeting already, I guess.
Oh, I can send her the message for
Really?
Parawati. Yeah,
Okay.
personal.
No, I mean for
Yeah.
Shalawat. For Shalawat.
Shalawat, let me check. Unfortunately, I believe that he might left.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, she, not he. Sorry. ที่ไหนคะ